I'm Ethan, and this is the story I've never had the courage to tell before. For as long as I can remember, my cousin Claire has always been the center of my life. You know, the type of person who, when they walk into a room, it feels like everything changes. When we were kids, she would come to visit us every summer, and I would count down the days to see her. She was 2 years older, always with that easygoing attitude, a light smile. But deep down, what I felt wasn't just familial affection. Of course, back then I didn't really understand. I just knew that when she went back home, I was devastated, almost sick. As we grew up, I understood. It wasn't just affection, it was love. Or at least what I thought was love. The problem? Claire never saw me that way. She was that older cousin who always had advice, scolded me, laughed at my foolishness, always kind. But she never looked at me with the same spark that I looked at her. And man, it killed me. When we hit adolescence, it got worse. I saw her talk about the guys at school, saw her go out with others, pretending everything was fine, being the cool cousin. But every time she told me about someone, it was like getting stabbed. Over time, we went our separate ways. She went to study abroad, and I stayed in our small town in rural Kentucky. But you know that feeling that doesn't go away? I tried to forget. I dated other girls, got a job, kept moving forward. But I always ended up stalking her profile, hoping for a message. Until one day, talking to some co-workers, one of them commented, half laughing, about a woman who knew someone who did work. Spells, root work, that stuff people in the South call old ways. He was saying it as a joke, saying that a friend of his had done a love binding, and weeks later, the girl who never looked at him showed up knocking on his door. I laughed along. But the idea stuck in my head. I spent weeks thinking about it. It seemed ridiculous, I knew. But what if? That's how I started looking. Discreetly, of course. First online, then asking around, until I got the contact information for a man known as Old Jeremiah. They said he lived isolated in a forgotten part of the forest, about 2 hours away by car, that he didn't ask questions, didn't charge cheap, and didn't mess with light stuff. It was work for those who wanted results. You just had to be willing to pay the price. At first, I hesitated, but every time I saw a picture of Claire with another guy, the decision became easier. One night, finally, I called the number I was given. On the other end, the voice was hoarse, low, like someone who didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. "Do you know what you want?" he asked, without beating around the bush. "I want her to love me, to only think of me." "That has a price," he replied. "Don't call me to back out later. Come to my house tomorrow night, bring something of hers, something of yours, and be decided." He gave me the directions. After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a few minutes, feeling like I had already passed the point of no return. The next night, I followed the directions. The road was getting more and more deserted, streetlights disappearing, just trees and more trees. The air seemed heavier as I entered the densest part of the forest. The cabin was as I imagined, old dark wood, with a crooked porch and a strange smell in the air, a mixture of smoke, wet earth, and something I couldn't identify. There were symbols scratched on the windows, amulets hanging from the ceiling. It was the kind of place you know you shouldn't be. Jeremiah was waiting for me at the door, a tall, thin man like a dry branch, dark skin full of wrinkles, eyes that seemed not to blink. He didn't say anything. He just gestured for me to come in. Inside, the atmosphere was stifling, illuminated only by red candles. The table in the center was covered with strange objects, pots with roots, small bones, figures sculpted in wax. "Did you bring what I asked for?" he asked. I took out of the backpack what I brought, a scarf that Claire had forgotten during a visit months earlier, one of my shirts, and a small tuft of my own hair, which I cut before leaving. Jeremiah nodded, took the objects carefully, as if they were precious. From the corner of the room, he took out two figures made of red wax, the size of the palm of my hand. This will be the two of you, only after today, she won't be able to look at anyone but you. He took a sharp blade, cut my name on one of the figures, hers on the other. He sewed pieces of the fabrics and our hairs inside each one. Then he lit an incense so strong that it almost made me lose my bearings. Then he took a knife and cut the palm of his own hand. The blood dripped slowly over the wax dolls. Then he looked at me, eyes fixed. Your blood seals the bond. Will you do it? At that moment, I should have backed out. I should have run out of that cabin and forgotten everything. But all I saw in my mind was her, Claire, her smile, the way she never looked at me as I wanted. So without hesitation, I took the blade and cut my palm. I felt the burning of the hot blood running, dripping on the figures. Jeremiah murmured words in a language I didn't know. The candles flickered, the air became colder. The two figures began to melt until they became one red mass. He looked at me for a long time, as if evaluating something inside me. It's done. In a few days, she will come to you. But listen, nothing that is forced like this comes for free. At the time, I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to think about the price. I could only think of one thing. Finally, she would be mine. I left the cabin feeling light, as if something in the universe had changed. Little did I know that I had just tied my soul to a chain that I would never be able to break. When old Jeremiah said that she would come to me in a few days, I thought it was witch talk, but he wasn't lying. 2 days after the ritual, I get a message from Claire. Nothing too crazy at first. A simple hi, I was thinking about you. How are you? The kind of thing that could be normal if it weren't for the fact that she had disappeared for months without responding to my last attempts to contact her. It was strange, but I didn't question it. I replied, started a conversation, and she seemed different, more open, more interested. The following week, she suggested we meet, only this time it wasn't that casual family talk. No, the way she talked to me, the messages, the emojis, the insinuations, it seemed like another person. When we saw each other, it was surreal. She hugged me like she never had before. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a nervous anxiety, as if she were seeing me for the first time. At that moment, I felt that everything had been worth it. The love that I had carried alone for years now came back to me multiplied. She complimented me, held my hand all the time, looked at me as if I were the only person in the world. We spent weeks like that. We went out almost every day, and it was always she who texted first. It was always she who wanted to extend it a little longer, stay until later. And the closer she got, the more invincible I felt, as if I had finally defeated destiny. But then it started to get weird. First, small details. I took too long to reply to a message because I was at work, and in a matter of minutes, she appeared in the company parking lot. She said she wanted to see me, that she felt an anguish for not talking to me. Then one night I went out with some friends. Nothing too crazy, just beer and conversation. I didn't tell her. I thought it was okay. But when I got home, she was standing at the gate. She stared at me with those huge eyes, a tense smile. Where were you? Why didn't you answer me? I tried to explain, but she interrupted me. Don't disappear like that. You're everything to me. At the time, I thought it was cute. Maybe she was just too in love, but then there was more. She started calling me in the middle of the night, always. If I didn't answer, it was call after call. Messages like, "You love me, right? You'll never leave me, right?" One day I even woke up and saw that she had left dozens of missed calls. When I asked her what was happening, she replied with a sweet smile, "I just wanted to hear your voice. I just wanted to know that you still think of me." That started to bother me. I tried to make space, give it time, but she always found a way to be around. I started to notice that If I mentioned any other person, friend, co-worker, even distant relative, she got tense, changed the subject quickly, or started asking too many questions. My mother noticed it too. One day, while we were having coffee, she commented, "Claire is different, isn't she? She's always been sweet, but now it seems like she doesn't let go of you." I pretended it was nothing, but inside something was starting to eat away at me. There was one night that I won't forget. I was at home, late already, when I heard knocks on the door. I went to open it, and there she was, in pajamas, hair messed up, eyes watery. "I felt that you were distant," she said without beating around the bush. She pulled my hand and placed it against her chest. "Don't let that happen. I need you." It was as if every time she got closer, I felt a greater weight. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about control. Even the way she touched me, it didn't seem like affection anymore. It seemed like despair, as if she was trying to trap me there, physically. The last straw came at a family lunch. Everything seemed normal, until, out of nowhere, Claire stood up and announced, with a wide smile in front of everyone, "I want you to know, Ethan is the man of my life. He's mine, and no one will separate us." The silence at the table was absolute. My parents looked at me in shock. My aunt almost dropped her glass. I didn't know what to say. That night my parents called me aside. "What's happening?" my mother asked, with a look that cut through me. I tried to say it was just too much affection, but she looked deep into my eyes. "Son, something's wrong. This isn't normal." I wanted to believe that it could be worked around, that maybe it was just the beginning phase, but deep down I already knew. This wasn't natural love. I tied her down, but now it seemed that who was trapped was me. I started avoiding her, ignoring messages, making up engagements. I thought that over time she would get tired, but it was the opposite. She started appearing out of nowhere, at the door of the work, at my parents' house, standing in the supermarket parking lot, always with that glazed look, always with that soft smile. But that didn't reach her eyes. I started having trouble sleeping. I dreamed about her every night. Not normal dreams, they were nightmares. Her calling me, holding my hand too tight, telling me that I could never leave again. The weight only increased. My head, my body. It was as if something was draining my energy, trapping my thoughts on her, even when I tried to escape. That's when I started to think that I needed to cut this off, but I already knew deep down that it wasn't going to be simple. Old Jeremiah said that none of this came without a price. And I was starting to understand exactly what he meant. After that family lunch, I knew I couldn't pretend everything was normal anymore. Claire didn't let go. Literally. If I took 5 minutes to answer, she was already at my door. If I went anywhere, she found a way to appear. I don't know how she knew where I was all the time, but she knew. It was as if she sensed it, as if she was connected to me in a way that I couldn't cut off. And I started to wither. Gradually, I lost my appetite. Sleeping became hell. I would wake up in the middle of the night with the sound of the phone ringing, and it was always her. Messages, calls, always wanting to know where I was, with whom, what I was doing. And it wasn't just that. I started having strange dreams. I dreamed about that night in the cabin, old Jeremiah speaking the words I didn't understand, the smell of the strong incense. But in the dreams, the wax figures didn't melt. They were there, stuck together, merged, red and pulsating like living flesh. And in the middle of the dream, I always heard her voice. "You're mine, always have been, always will be." It got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to disappear. I asked for a transfer at work, took the little money I had, and went to another city without telling anyone. I changed my number, deleted social media, blocked everything. I wanted to cut off any chance of her finding me. For a few weeks, it worked. New city, new routine. No messages, no appearances at the gate. I even started to believe that I had made it. That's when I met Lena, a colleague from the new work, light, calm, the kind of person that makes you laugh effortlessly. We started going out slowly. I wanted to believe that it could be different this time, but deep down, I knew. On the first night that I tried something more with her, everything fell apart. Everything was right. Good vibe, her close, laughing, hands touching. But at the moment we kissed, my mind simply switched off. The smell I felt wasn't hers. It was Claire's. The touch wasn't Lena's. It was hers. And before I knew it, my body started to freeze. The same weight, the same knot in my chest, that feeling of being watched, spied on. I moved away, made up an excuse, and left there as if I were running from something invisible. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to look at my cell phone or the mirror to know. She was there, and it didn't take long to be sure. One day, coming back from work, passing on any street, I felt a shiver. That instinct that someone is following you. When I looked over my shoulder, there she was, at the end of the street, standing, smiling. How did she know where I was? How had she found me? I don't know. The worst part is that when I tried to walk faster, I felt my legs heavy, the air around dense, as if something was pulling me back. She didn't need to run. She just kept walking, always at my pace. When I finally arrived at the apartment and locked the door, I stayed there, sitting on the floor, trying to breathe. My head hammered, my vision spun. That's when I realized. It wasn't just her who was obsessed. I was trapped too. The bond I created wasn't a chain around her. It was a rope that tied knots in both of us. Each attempt to escape only tightened it more. In desperation, I remembered old Jeremiah. I called the same number. It went straight to voicemail. I went back to the forest a week later, determined to confront him, to ask him to break everything. But when I arrived at the clearing where the cabin was, there was nothing left. No sign of the cabin, no trace. As if it had never existed. I stood there, listening only to the sound of the wind in the trees, with a strange feeling as if the world had folded. That night I dreamed of him for the last time. In the dream, Jeremiah looked at me from across a fire, eyes empty. He only said one thing: to cut, you have to bleed more than once. I woke up sweating, not understanding what that meant. But a part of me knew that whatever the price, I wasn't willing to pay. Running away didn't help. Changing cities, cutting contact, trying another person, none of that made a difference. The bond wasn't external. It was inside me. Since then, I've stopped trying to escape. She continues to appear, sometimes in dreams, sometimes on the street, among strangers. Sometimes it's just the light touch on my shoulder when I think I'm alone. And always with that calm smile, that certainty in her eyes. You belong to me. I created this, I asked for this, and now I know there's no one to blame but myself. If you're thinking about doing something similar, if you believe you can force love where it doesn't exist, remember, it's not just the person who is tied down, you too, forever. Churches, folk healers, mediums. I tried everything, but the more you try to undo it, the more you realize that the bond was woven from the inside out. It's no use cutting the rope if it's tied to your own chest. Sometimes, what seems to be your greatest wish becomes your greatest prison. Don't make the same mistake.